Pakistan Studies, past paper 2059, summer 2017. This is paper 1, History and Culture of Pakistan. So the first one is section A, in which they have given us the source material, which is talking about the Indian cotton industry. The source is taken from the Economic History of India under early British rule by R.C. Dutt. The first question is asking, according to a source, what difficulties did the Indian cotton industry face during the 19th century? The Indian production of cotton goods was discouraged in favor of the British industry because the British, once they colonized India, they decided to, take hold of every industry that was within the confines of Indian economic development. So they were not preferred. Second point is that the Indians were only allowed to transfer raw goods to the cotton looms that were under the British rule. So therefore, there was not much of an economic growth coming from within the Indian local market. Skilled workers who knew how to produce cotton were then transferred to the East India Company, and because of that a lot of skilled labor was taken away from the Indian population. So therefore the cotton industry of India hampered greatly because of that. High tariffs, high tax returns, and high production cost made it impossible nearly for Indians to export their cotton to Britain. On the other hand, however, there was no duty on the goods for the British. They could easily send their goods to India without any tariffs, without any taxes. So it was a very one way uh, upper hand sort of situation happening for the British because they had colonized India and that was their motif. Question 1, section B. How does source B help us understand Indian concerns about the building of railways in the 19th century? Now, you can see in the picture that there is a massive accident that has happened, and probably a transportational train has railed over due to poor construction. Now, the question asks that what does the source tell us in with regards to the Indians and their concern about building railways in the 19th century. So most Indians basically believed that the trains were dangerous and unsafe to travel because of such accidents. There was a risk of a lot of damage being done to property and life because railway construction was faulty at the time, and scenes like the ones in the picture were a common sight during the colonization phase of India. People were very afraid to travel via trains because they really felt unsafe. There were some who believed that the British are changing their way of life because for them, trains were something seen as a Western influence that is going to take away a lot from the Indian population as far as their culture and their rituals are concerned. Part C. Why did the British build railways in India in the 19th century? So this is another important question that is asked during exams, and the answer to that is the British basically established railways so that they can transport goods easily and cheaply because India was a vast empire and they needed to have good lines of communication from all across the country so that they can transfer goods, carry troops, and make sure that the Indian government that they are running a smooth, and any there are no hitches when they're running the government. The British could travel with ease, reaching far flung places, and because of that they could spread their ideas and their cultures without any problems faced, considering the times that they lived in. And especially during the times of famine, there was a great need of food and goods and other materials to be transported to far off places, which was done through railways. The Indian public themselves could travel to areas where their families lived, which were far from their places. So it established a connection between different families from within India, connecting through railways. Part D. Was the absence of leadership the main reason the War of Independence failed? Now, this is a 10 marks question. The first thing that the students need to do is explain their answer in detail, which basically means that the examiner is basically looking for you to elaborate on the answer and evaluate it properly. They are trying to make sure that you understand what exactly went in during the War of Independence. There are a number of reasons, and usually, when questions like these come, there is always the one simple rule to understand, that the question that is being directed is not the only answer to that question. Meaning, if the question says, was the absence of leadership the main reason of the War of Independence? That is necessarily not the only answer. You cannot just simply say, yes, that was the main reason because of this, and you expect 10 marks. That is a wrong way to go about it. The correct way, however, to go about it is to divide your answer accordingly. There was, yes, absence of leadership was a cause for the lack of a cohesion between different populations within the Indian citizenship. But at the same time, there were other reasons that construed the War of Independence to fail. So there was absence of leadership, yes, but we have to talk about other reasons as well. So first of all, if you want to discuss the lack of leadership, well, there were two leaders at that time who were considered prominent in their aspects. One was Bahadur Shah Zafar, mainly because he was someone who was considered as a weak ruler. He was someone who had no power of his own, and he just used to sit in his court and write poetry. I mean, that's the kind of ruler he was, who just, like, there's chaos happening all around him, and he's just sitting there writing good poetry and, trying to be published as a poet. So that was the kind of ruler he was at that time. And then Hindus did not trust him because obviously he was a Muslim, and they thought that he will be looking out for Muslim interests. There was no influence from Bahadur Shah himself to actually believe that this particular person could lead a rebellion against a very cohesive British unit. Second ruler was Rani of Jhansi, who was from the south, a Marathan queen, basically fighting the British. But at the same time, just like Bahadur Shah Zafar, she had no support outside of her immediate circle. So basically, she was fighting alone. And because of that, there was not many there were not many people who actually knew what her fight was about. And Muslims did not trust her because she was an Hindu, and she believed in somewhat of a Hindu supremacy. So therefore, did not feel inclusive in her site as well. So there was no influence from her towards the rest of India. So they were just fighting in pockets. There was no unity. Some other reasons for the failure of War of Independence basically stems from the fact that there was no common cause among the Indians. Muslims were fighting for something else, the Hindus were fighting for something else, the Sikhs were fighting for something else. There was nothing cohesive about them. So, because of that, there was a lack of proper goal that they wanted to achieve after the War of Independence. There was no support from the Punjab. That is one of the very major reasons that Punjab, the largest province of the subcontinent at that time, did not give any support to the rebels. Instead, they gave all their wealth, all their logistics, all their material good support to the British. They sent weapons, they sent troops, every kind of support was given to the British instead, which actually made the British even stronger. Indian princes who were divided in amongst princely states were fighting to gain influence on the country themselves. They weren't fighting for a cause. They weren't fighting for somebody who was like the poor or the defenseless. They were fighting for themselves. And because of that, there was again the same word, lack of cohesion between the units of the Indian population. On the other hand, the British were a well organized unit. They had a strong military, they had a strong infantry, they knew what kind of weapons to be used, how to use the weapons, the modern weapons, which the Indian population lacked the knowledge of. Therefore, the British took full advantage after initial setbacks. They fought and they took control with even more force than they were exerting before the War of Independence. So that's that for section A. Now coming to section B, two questions are supposed to be attempted. These are the two questions that in this past paper have been attempted and we will explain them. So section B, question 2, who were zamindars? Now this is a 4 mark question, so basically what you have to do is just point out the basic facts of who zamindars are. They were landlords and tax collectors. They were considered influential and some even had private armies and they were wealthy. After Aurangzeb's death, however, these zamindars tried to gain more influence and they refused to give any fealty to any new emperor because they thought that any other ruler apart from Aurangzeb would not be worthy. In Bengal, Muslims were oppressed by zamindars because they had a beard tax ensued on the Muslims, which was a much great annoyance for the Muslims. So these are some of the points which, if a student writes, will carry full marks for the question. Why was Robert Clive, now this is section B, why was Robert Clive appointed the next new governor of Bengal? Now this is for 7 marks. Clive led the British to victory in the Battle of Plassey in 1757. Now Clive fought the Mir of Bengal and defeated him thanks to the help of Mir Jafar, who he established connections with and therefore won the war. Now, because of winning Bengal, such an important district, such an important province of the Indian subcontinent, he rose greatly in the eyes of the British and was made governor as a reward. He established British stronghold in Bengal. The battle increased Clive's reputation and he became the most famous commander of his time. He was made governor as a reward for services rendered. Section C, was the infighting between Aurangzeb's successor the most important reason for the breakup of the Mughal Empire? 14 marks. Now, again, the question is kind of written in a similar way as that War of Independence question was written. It basically says, was the infighting between Aurangzeb's successor the most important reason for the breakup of the Mughal Empire? Now, again, yes, it is one of the reasons, but it was not the only reason. Since it's a 14-mark question, you will have to talk about both aspects. So, some of the reasons other than the infighting were risk of invasions due to crumbling empire, extravagant lifestyle of the rulers after Aurangzeb, Afghan invaders under Ahmad Shah, who came and fought the Marathas at Panipat. One got hold of Delhi but could not consolidate their power across the whole of the subcontinent, so they had to go back. Similarly, Persians invaded under Nader Shah and they captured much of the eastern part of the subcontinent. They ransacked Delhi for 3 days, took all the things, valuable things from Delhi. A lot of amount of gold was taken, and then they moved back to Persia. These two invasions hampered the economy of the Mughal Empire greatly. Aurangzeb's intolerance was another reason. His intolerance towards non-Muslims led to resentment from the Hindu and Sikh population, and because of that, there was much uh, cause for rebellion amongst these people who actually rose against these people. Marathas defeated an outdated Mughal army in 1737 and took control of Delhi and Bengal. And lastly, the British were expanding rapidly, which the Mughals had no answer to. So we've attempted question number 5 for this past paper just to make sure that every aspect is covered. So this question 5 is usually done from the modern standpoint of where Pakistan after it's basically from the era of 1947 to 1999. So question number 5, part A, what was SEATO or SCATO? It was basically a Southeast Asia Treaty Organization established in 1955, which included the USA and the Britain. So this basically was a bloc created to stop the communist expansion reaching Southeast Asia. Why did being that's now part B, why did being a nuclear power create difficulties for Pakistan in the 1980s and 1990? This is a 7-mark question. Basically, the US was threatening Pakistan to stop aid. That was one of the reasons. Another reason is overall aid reduction from across the Western Hemisphere hampered the economy of Pakistan and also increased the country's debt. India, on the other hand, was busy creating its nuclear weapons, so that created a lot of problems for Pakistani government because they thought that now this is a direct threat to the sovereignty of of the people of Pakistan. So they had to make a nuclear bomb. So despite constant retaliation from the West, Pakistani scientists were busy experimenting with nuclear fissions and trying to make a bomb to deter India from doing anything drastic. The last point for that is Pakistan, because of like this continuous obsession to get nuclear weapons, was considered as a rogue state by the international fraternity, and because of that, Pakistan during the era of 1980s to 1990s was not part of the Commonwealth as well, because they were taken out by just for not signing the nuclear non-proliferation treaty. C part. To what extent was the relationship between Pakistan and Afghanistan successful from 1947 to 1999? Now, here again, this is a two-pronged answer. You just have to pick both the things and try to elaborate on each aspect because it's a 14-mark answer. So it is expectant of you to give a little bit detail as to what your answers would be. So make sure to evaluate your answer, and because Pakistan's relation with Afghanistan has been a very precarious relationship. Since the inception of Pakistan, Afghanistan has had a cold relationship with Pakistan. Afghanistan was the only country to reject Pakistan's application to the United Nations in 1947, and also they had claims for the uh, for some parts of the NWFP, and their diplomatic relations were withdrawn in 1955 due to this constant threat of communism seeping in the government. During the Afghan War, some planes actually entered Pakistan, and they managed to bomb some of the places, which increased tensions between the two neighboring countries. Now, this was for the less successful part. All of these points that were just discussed are things that made the relationships less successful. So, by Afghanistan rejecting Pakistan in 1947, then diplomatic relations were being withdrawn in 1955 to the Afghan War in 1979. All of these times were seen as problematic between Pakistan and Afghanistan. Now, coming to the more successful part, during the reign of Zahir Shah, the countries had a more cordial relationship because Pakistan was considered as a good ally of Afghanistan, and also Pakistan thought that Afghanistan taking a neutral stance instead of a pro India stance, which they had always taken, was a sign of better things to come. And during the 1970s, because of the Islamic foreign policy that was introduced, leading to the 1974 Islamic conference held in Lahore, relations with Afghanistan became even more cordial, and people started to government started to exchange diplomatic ties. And after the Afghan war ended in 1980, the relationships between the government again became better because of the way Pakistani government treated the refugees that came from Afghanistan. So that is basically the two sides of the story of Afghanistan, and because of that, this is how it happened.